Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
So this is if you go into that module 2, these are the courses that you're going. This is the classes that you're going to see for this module 2. So module 2 has we have the clinical trial agreement, we have the clinical trial budgets, we have regulatory FDA regulations, we have financial disclosure, good clinical practice, we have ICH, investigator brochure, investigator product. So because we have an hour to come for today's class, I would like us to start with a good clinical practice. Then I'll give you guys assignments to complete 2 more sessions here, so that when you come in our next class, we'll be able to evaluate you. We can just quickly run over, or you read you go through those classes, those 2 classes, bring your questions to our next class. So in that class now, we're going to be talking just high-level overview of what you've learned, answer your questions, and move to the next. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like us to go through the GCP. The reason why I'm choosing the GCP is because it gives us an opportunity of really understanding the good clinical practice of what's supposed to be conducted at the site level for research. Okay. So the learning objective of this class is because we're able to understand good clinical practice guidelines, discuss the history behind good clinical practice, discuss the various principles of good clinical practice, and how these guidelines are met in the clinical trials. So from this point moving forward, right? Remember that the first module, we talk about the basics, drug discovery, preclinical, the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We talk about the different other phases, new phases that has come up. From this point forward, these are the most important components that we want to be talking about when it comes to clinical research practice and participation. Because with GCP, if you become a monitor, a clinical research associate, you will be assessing sites or discussing with sites based off on their active participation and implementation of good clinical practice in the research activities that they're conducting. If their practice of clinical research does not follow the pattern of good clinical practice, then that's a problem. So key terms, ICH, GCP. GCP is a good clinical practice standard designed for the conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials that provide assurance that the data and the reported results are credible, one, they're accurate, and that the rights, integrity, and the confidentiality of trials of subjects is protected. Now, not every subject that's in a trial, not every patient that's in a clinical trial will like for their study, for their medical records to be in the world, for people to know that they are in a clinical trial. Just like how not everybody that has cancer like to tell everybody that I have cancer. Yeah. So their participation in clinical trial has to be protected, their confidentiality and their rights to that trial. Every trial has a component that says that patients have the right to say that I don't want to be part of this study anymore at any point in time without any reasoning or justification, because it's a voluntary activity that they're volunteering themselves to be part of that research. So GCP is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conduct, recording, and reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. These standards ensures that the rights and safety of the trial subject are protected and that the trial results are credible. Now, how do you determine the credibility of a trial result? The data. Now, how do you actually determine that? The data has been collected. You'll be surprised because when data is, when there's something called falsification, and these are all punishable activities that go on by sites. The FDA punished a lot of physicians who are conducting research, a lot of investigators who manufacture data. And believe it or not, these are things that happen, right? Physicians manufacture data for non-existing subjects because when the monitor comes, when the clinical research associate like yourself come to the site to evaluate the data, to verify the data, you don't have to see the patients, you don't have to see the subject, right?
Yeah.
They can just make up subjects, they can just make up things. But now there are different criteria that FDA uses to be able to catch people like that. Key term, US FDA. The Food and Drug Administration in the United States government is responsible for the regulation and approval of sale of drugs and diagnostics in the United States. Now, what is ICH? Remember, we talked about briefly ICH at the preclinical level. ICH is the International Conference of Harmonization of technical requirements for the registration of pharmaceutical products for human use. It is an internationally accepted guidelines that is which is a result of the need for harmonization between pharmaceutical companies and the drug-related companies between the US, EU, and Japan. So Japan have their own regulatory authorities. European Union also have theirs. They will also talk about FDA for the United States. ICH has various guidelines under 4 major topics: safety, quality, efficacy, and multidisciplinary. Out of these 4 topics, good clinical practice defined in section 6 of efficacy, commonly referred to as ICH E6. So I'm going to send you guys also the ICH. I'm going to send the ICH guidelines. So I'll send the ICH E6. The history of GCP. Several unethical clinical trials led to the development of ethical principles for the conduct of clinical research. 1, it gave birth to Food and Drug Administration Act in 1938. That is, before being marketed, every drug must be tested for safety. It gave birth to the originated of the Nuremberg Code. So the Nuremberg Code is something that I will ask you guys to also take a look at. The Tuskegee syphilis trial. The Tuskegee syphilis trial is the trial I was just talking about earlier. Was the longest unethical trial in history.
Yeah. That's why Black Americans don't want anything to do with
clinical trial, exactly. And they hate pharmaceutical companies because
yes.
People who have read the history understands that they know that up till now, there's a lot of unethical trials that up till President Clinton had to apologize to the black population for this trial being conducted. If you want to get a full story, you can just go on YouTube and say, type Tuskegee syphilis trial. You get the full story of what this trial was entailed, and you really see the suffering, how unethical trials were conducted in the past before the initiation of FDA to guide us.
There were also a lot of trials done on prisoners.
Yes, horrible. And even in the military.
Yeah.
Even in the military as well. Thalidomide disaster in the 1960. Thalidomide, that's another one that you can take a look at to see. You can also watch that on YouTube. When you have a downtime, just take a look at review that. It broadens your understanding of the source of clinical trial regulation. It originated from the Kefauver-Harris Drug Amendment in 1962. This amendment made proof of safety efficacy mandatory for the submission and application of FDA for human testing. So I think this is one of those other trials. This is one of those other instances where there was a drug that was approved. I think it was approved in Europe, but the effect of that, it causes, I think it was given to pregnant women, if I'm not mistaken, it was given to pregnant women, but it actually caused children were born with physical defects.
Yeah.
short hands and short feet. And we still have people who are alive today who were part of this, evidence of this mishap. The Declaration of Helsinki. So in 1964, the World Medical Administration in Helsinki, Finland, announced the guidelines which became the basis to present ethical principles provided in the ICH GCP. Now, what's the Declaration of Helsinki? The Declaration of Helsinki includes the guidelines for ethical conduct involving human in biomedical research, incorporates 10 principles from the Nuremberg Code. Now, if we are preparing ourselves to take, the board, not board, to take a certification exam for clinical research, these are very, very important. These are very, very important aspects to be considered for to be part of the preparation for the exams. Why ICH GCP? ICH GCP regulates clinical trial involves human subjects, humans. ICH helps to protect the rights, safety, and well-being of research subjects, ensures scientific integrity in clinical trials, ensures that the data generated is credible and is being evaluated for the final results, ensure the acceptance of data worldwide, which means that every data that was provided by the FDA can also be applicable in the European Union and Japan. ICH was developed in accordance with the existing standard in the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, Canada, Nordic countries in the World Health Organization. So the intention for ICH, which is the International Conference of Harmonization, is actually intended to make sure that the result for the data that were obtained at the United States for clinical trials conducted in the United States is acceptable. It's acceptable at the level of, screenshot stop because it's not displaying disconnected.
Yeah, we cannot see our screen any longer.
Yeah, I think my thing went off. Let me plug it back in. So the intention for the ICH is to make sure that each trials that was conducted in the United States, in Europe, or in Japan, we can share data. Remember when we started, I think you had asked the question that, so what if a trial is being conducted in the US? Is it applicable in Europe, right? The data is applicable in Europe under the ICH GCP guidelines, because now they'll be able to evaluate to say, okay, even though this data was done, this clinical research was done in the United States and has been approved by the FDA, the European Union might not have to do the clinical research all together again. They'll be able to review the data, make sure that the data is compliant. Then, according to the ICH GCP guidelines, then they can go ahead to approve that within the European Union. The 13 principles of ICH GCP includes: 1, the conduct the clinical research, clinical trial according to GCP, which has its origin in the Declaration of Helsinki. Make a rational decision between the risk and the anticipated benefits. Ensure the right safety and well-being of subjects in the research subjects. Available information, non-clinical and clinical, should support and justify the purpose of clinical research. Prepare a sound and detailed protocol for the trial. Always receive IRB and institutional ethics committee approvals for the protocol before you start the trial. Use qualified physicians or dentists to take research-related decisions. All research staff should be qualified by education, training, and experience. Prior to participation, informed consent must be obtained. Trial-related information should be recorded, handled, and stored properly to ensure proper interpretation and verification. Trial subjects' confidentiality must be protected by all possible means. Investigational products should be properly manufactured using the good manufacturing practice, handled properly, and stored properly. Implement proper quality system within the trial. And proper quality system, we're thinking about quality assurance programs within the trials, within the trial that's being conducted. How is the GCP implemented in the US? Now, US offices responsible for ensuring the right safety and well-being of GCP include the FDA. FDA is a US organization, of course, responsible for the management of ethics and safety of human subjects. It's also involved the Office of Human Subject Research, OHRP. So OHRP also manages the safety of human subjects. The structure of GCP. So GCP is that international body, GCP is right here like the boss. It goes down to now, this is actually within the United States. GCP now goes down to FDA. FDA has something called 21 CFR. 21 CFR, we're going to go down deep into what 21 CFR is all about. But 21 CFR just being able to identify areas of electronic documentation, informed consent, financial disclosure, IND registrations. Remember this IND we talked about is the investigational new drug registrations. And the IRB is the institutional review boards. We have Office of Human Research Participant, Human Research Protection. So it's also another office that manages to implement the protection of human research participants. Now, what is their conduct? They have conduct to make sure that they review the IRBs, which is the institutional review boards. They review the informed consent. They're also looking at the involvement of women in research. They're looking at the involvement of prisoners in research. They're also looking at how children can also be participants in research. Because an important question is that we ask, if it is unethical for children to be involved in research, then how do we determine the drugs that children will be qualified to receive when they are treated? Because honestly, children are not little humans. The children are not small humans. And when we talk about small humans, it's the fact that children have a lot of other developmental process to go through, different phases to go through before they become adults, which of course significantly involves the development of their organs as well. And it doesn't mean that because the heart is small, it means that we should reduce the dose for the cardiovascular disease for an adult to match that of a child, right? We have to also conduct research for that children population involved in research. ICH is mostly concerned about the international ability for this clinical trial performance. It's about the glossary, the principles involved, the IRBs, the investigator. Investigator now will be the clinician, the physician in the clinic. They'll be able to assess them to understand where an investigator is involved in the study. What is the responsibility of the investigator? What are they supposed to be doing? We're looking at a sponsor. The sponsor is typically the manufacturing company. The manufacturing companies intended to make sure to utilize, to understand, okay, what are my responsibilities to the site? How am I responsible for this study? What am I supposed to be doing as part of my own ICH GCP compliance responsibility for this study? We talk about the essential documents. Essential documents involve documents that have to do with the regulatory approvals and submissions. So FDA's office. The FDA is a branch of the Department of Health and Human Services. They regulate all aspects of the pharmaceutical industry. The Title 21 Code of Federal Regulation, this is the 21 CFR Code of Federal Regulation, has a guideline, has all the guidelines related to food and drug. So the FDA has something called 21 CFR, and this is also another very important note that I would like you guys to take care of. 21 CFR, you can go online, or you can go attend on the resource. You can just go and click on the link at 21 CFR. What is 21 CFR? You can go on YouTube. I'll give you a brief understanding of what 21 CFR is all about. It gives you a good understanding how 21 CFR is applicable for the management of food and drug administration in the FDA. Now, how is 21 CFR applicable to clinical research? 21 CFR has different parts. It has different parts up to part 812. So you can imagine how big that 21 CFR book will look like. On the FDA website, they've made it very simple. You can easily just click your point of interest, then it takes you directly to the page that that you want. So 21 CFR guidelines applicable to clinical research. First, part 11. Part 11 is a very important part in our practice in clinical research, because part 11 gives guidelines for electronic record and signatures. With the COVID and everything that occurred, it was difficult for sites to provide wet ink signatures, because most people were working from home. To provide wet ink signature means you have to go to the clinic. Then there was a lot of restrictions involved. So a lot of manufacturing companies emailed, reach out to the FDA and say, hey, we have this study, it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to obtain wet ink signatures. How can we make sure that electronic signatures are acceptable according to FDA guidelines? Then FDA, of course, this 21 CFR part 11 is not only, it didn't come just as a result of COVID. This has been, but they had modifications, amendments that occur over time as we experience new situations in our social and economic lives. So they also want to make sure that they provide guidelines of how data can be collected electronically. Part 50, 21 CFR part 50. So the definition, the way these things usually work is that they will say 21 CFR part 50. Or they can say 21 CFR part 50, subpart 11, subpart 10, or subpart 1. It's just like a code, So 21 CFR part 50 talks about the protection of human subjects. 21 CFR part 54 talks about the financial disclosure for clinical investigators, who are the physicians they are working on, conducting research at the site level. 21 CFR part 56 talks about the institutional review boards. Part 312 talks about the institutional investigational new drug application, the NDA, INDA. So how are they submitting that application to the FDA? Part 312 talks about the application for FDA approval to the market. So that's the NDA application. Part 600, biological products, and part 812, medical devices. Any questions so far? Okay.
You know why they use 21? What is the significance of 21 there?
I have no idea. It's just been, as we are growing within the industry, that's been their standard for, I think it has to do with some kind of a code that FDA utilizes within their department.
Yeah, thank you.
Are we expected to recite this code somewhere, sometime, for any reason?
So, if you are going to take your exam, the certification exam, at some point, you have to know this codes, what they're applicable to. And also, it's not, I expect you to have it all handy, right? But the most use of these codes is when you're applying for roles that have to deal with regulatory specialists, regulatory manager roles for job. But as a clinical research associate, you have to be familiar with these codes, because when you are going to the site to evaluate and assess their data collection and verification, you want to make sure that they are compliant with FDA Part 21, FDA 21 CFR Part 11. Because sites may collect, there's a format of electronic signatures that FDA has approved under Part 11, but the site may collect electronic signatures different from what the FDA approved at. And because you, as the site, clinical research associate, and you are aware of what these regulations are supposed to be, then you'll be able to determine that the site is doing something right or wrong.
Okay, that answers my question I had. How did they resolve the wet ink consent issue with now that people were quarantining and online consultation and things like treatment even? So the consent, how did they resolve it, the wet ink stuff?
So it became significantly important because now, for example, we may have a subject who wants to participate in a study, and the subject doesn't want to come to the clinic because they're scared of COVID. Mm-hmm. And now, because they are scared of COVID, they don't want to come to the clinic. Now, how do you consent them? Good question. You consent them by actually, the FDA now, for each manufacturing company has this, they have the study population. They will email, they'll reach out to FDA with their resources. In my experience, a lot of pharmaceutical companies develop something called, they develop electronic format. They develop apps. They develop mobile apps where they will send out a device. They will ship devices to patients' home. Patients will receive those devices. They will install those apps in those devices. The patient now will consent and continue to work to relate to them through those devices. A lot of other companies also were able to design apps that were used in that. The apps were uploaded in the App Store. Patient will go on there, download those apps, then they'll provide patients with the unique identification that they'll be able to track from their end to make sure that they are relating to collect patient data as applicable. Now, if the patient has to sign a consent form, or if the physician has to sign a consent form, that signature must be must be compliant with what 21 CFR Part 11 indicates.
Thank you.
Welcome. The Belmont Report. So the Belmont Report is part of what the Office of Human Research Subject Participants, Human Research Subject Protection actually indicates. In 1978, the Commission published ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subjects of research, also known as the Belmont Report. So if you want to get more additional information about the Belmont Report, you can also look that up on YouTube. But the three things I just want to really point out, which are the three fundamental principles of the Belmont Report, which are very, very important in your conduct of clinical research, is first, the respect of persons. The respect of persons means that the Belmont Report made provision to indicate that informed consent must be signed before each participant can participate in the study. Each subject can participate in the study. They have something called beneficence. Beneficence means that there's a favorable benefit between the risk and benefit ratio before each participant can participate in the research. They have justification, justice. Justice means that the selection of the candidates must be based on inclusion and exclusion criteria. Please give me 1 second.
Yes, Mr. Andrew, over to you, the next teacher from Maryland to New Jersey before you.
Yeah.
So which church do you attend?
I attend Presbyterian Church.
Right, Presbyterian and Baptist and neighbors.
Yeah, you attend Baptist?
Yeah, so take my number 610
Okay.
909
610-909
2466.
2466.
All right.
Okay, Pastor Ennis. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Prof, go right ahead.
Okay, awesome. So these are the three fundamental ethical principles in the practice of clinical research, human subject protection. So the first thing is the respect for persons, which means that you're giving the autonomy to the subject to be able to sign an informed consent to authorize you to conduct research, to authorize that they want to participate in the conduct of research. So that's the first thing. The second is the beneficence, the favorable benefit between the risk and benefit ratio, which means that as a clinician conducting clinical research, as an investigator conducting clinical research, you will be able to assess that your subject's participation in this research is going to be beneficial to them, because you've explored every other treatment options and you realize that there is no other treatment option that will be beneficial than their participation in clinical research. Justice, how are you selecting subject? That's the reason why they brought in yep.
In randomized control, what is the beneficence of a placebo? Is that no injustice?
So, excellent question, right? So the placebo, the justification for the placebo is just, you think about the psychological impact.
Okay.
Right? Psychological impact. The patient is not aware that they're not receiving the active ingredients. The patient is aware that they are in the clinical trial. They also are aware that this trial is randomized, and they are aware that there's a possibility that they might be receiving the active ingredient or the placebo. Now, if the investigator is also blinded, an investigator is treating the physician, the subject, investigator will closely monitor the subject and say, okay, if subject A is getting better, why is subject B not getting better?
Yep.
Then you can say, oh, maybe subject B is receiving the placebo and not the active ingredient. Or maybe subject B is receiving the active ingredient, but it's causing them to be more sick. And subject A is not receiving the active ingredient, but they are feeling better. But at the end of the day, the results, or how do we finally come to that conclusion, will be based off the result that we've concluded, doing the actual report that has been provided at the end of the trial.
Okay.
There are also emergency situations. There are emergency situations that a subject might experience significant adverse event that has been hospitalized for multiple occasions and multiple days. The investigator is concerned, reach out to the manufacturing company and say, hey, listen, I know that this drug is blinded. My patient has been sick for a while, has been going back and forth, it's almost at the point of death. I would like to know the kind of ingredient that the patient is receiving. Is the patient receiving the active ingredient or the placebo? Those emergency situations, they can have the manufacturing company will immediately reach out to the FDA. FDA approve them to unblind that drug for the investigator to be aware. The Office of Human Research Protection. So OHRP was formerly known as the Office of Protection for Research and Risk, but now they've really fine-tune it to mean that not just research risk, but actually human research protection. It's responsible for ensuring the right safety and well-being of research participants in participating in the study. The guidelines ensuring that the risk, safety, and well-being of participants under health and human services trials are given 45 CFR Part 46. So this is also another code that's being used, but typically this is being used by the Office of Human Research Protection Office. Now you look at the different components of this 45 CFR Part 46. What is it about? So this actually is mainly intended to provide and to ensure that the safety of rights, safety, and well-being of human participants are of paramount importance to the research investigator. Now it has different subparts. We have subpart A and subpart B. Subpart B mainly talk about the policy for the protection, while subpart B is really in addition to the subpart A, specifically talks about special population, which involves pregnant women, fetus, neonates, and different other sort of special populations such as children and prisoners. Subpart C goes along to explain about the content of the IRB and how IRB will go along with the protection of different. So the most important in takeaway I want you guys to take away from from the OHRP is really to think about the OHRP as that body that provides make provisions for the protection of human subject research for participants, and also not just that, but goes along to also look at the special population, right? Yeah. Special population, prisoners, women, fetus, pregnant women, and all of that. So those are the different, those are the major takeaway that I want you guys to think about when you think about Office of Human Research Protection.
They're doing like something like minorities.
Yes, exactly. GCP components. As mentioned before, ISA GCP is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for clinical trials. So what is it composed of? Composed of designing, conducting, recording, and also reporting clinical trials. Design for a study. It doesn't only make sure that we look at the study, so it makes sure that we look at how the study is designed. You know, the design, does it have so in my current role, I am part of an approving committee where we review the protocols to make sure that they are ethical, they have scientific evidence before we approve this study, these protocols to be, to move to the next phase in the process. So all components required by GCP guidelines should be addressed in the protocol. You have the investigator's brochure, should include all available information about the investigational product till date. The scientific soundness. So scientific soundness, there should be a scientific background in designing the study in terms of patient selection and research questions that they want to answer. They have to answer the research question that they are seeking. But now it has to have that scientific evidence to prove that the completion of this study will add scientific contributions to the community and scientific knowledge. Even if a study fails, even if a research study actually fails, but it has provided scientific knowledge to the community, because now we understand what not to do. We now understand what not to do in the conduct of these kind of trials for them not to fail. We're looking at the feasibility of the study. The feasibility, the study should be designed to be easily carried out, but easy to execute. Adequate resources. Do we have enough technology? Do we have enough resources to be able to use in the conduct of this study? We are looking at randomization and blinding. So randomization and blinding, of course, is intended to reduce bias, just like we talked about. Standard for conduct. So IRB and regulatory approvals are needed before any trial can be conducted. They have to be compliant with the protocol. The informed consent is mandatory before any trial-related activities can be conducted. Confidentiality of data. The data must be collected and secured and without access to any unauthorized personnel, which means anybody that has access to the authority, anybody who is participating, who is working for the study, are the only people that will be authorized to have access to the patient population, to the patient's medical data. Standard for conduct. Medical management of adverse events. The hospital should have qualified doctors and adequate resources to manage any adverse event that may occur during the participation of subjects in the research. So you think about the fact that there is little management, medical management of adverse events for a hospital in Moyoka, for example, because that alone is that's why they cannot conduct research in those remote areas. Product accountability. The investigational product should be kept safe and secure and must be accounted for its use. Qualification and training. So research staff should be educated, experienced, and should be trained on the protocol. So for every study that you'll be assigned, for example, you are the clinical research associate for the study. You're working for a clinical research organization and you have been assigned a new study. You have to go through the entire study. You review every part of that study because now your evaluation or your review or your assessment of data that has been collected by the site will be based off your knowledge of that protocol. The standard for recording. CFR completion. CFR means case report forms. Case report forms means these are just forms that, because for example, you may have, I'm trying to look for anything that will have a meaning. Okay, you may be conducting research, right? You may be conducting research and you have questions. You have questions. For example, you may have one field that says, that will say date of birth, height, weight. So all the data that is being collected will be imputed in that CFR. So a CFR is just a form to collect all the data that is being recorded during the conduct of clinical research. Data handling. Data handling should be provided, should be recorded in a tool provided by the sponsor or the manufacturing company. And maintaining security maintenance. The data recorded should be kept in a safe and secure system, either electronic or in paper forms. There are some sites that are still using paper forms. So what they typically do is that they will have a room like this. This is a research office. They have their data that they are keeping their binders there. They will have shelves, they keep their binders, and all those binders there will be kept and the door will be locked to make sure that only people who are authorized have access to that door.
That's old school.
Yeah, I mean, this is what it is, right? But now a lot of sites are going into electronic system where they're able to manage all their data electronically. And of course, that also has backup security.
Yeah.
Standard for recording. Product accountability. Products should be accounted in terms of the quantity received, the quantity dispensed, the quantity returned, and the quantity destroyed. So that's the reasons why sometimes a patient may come to the clinic, collect a bottle of pills like this, go home. They are supposed to be taking those pills and recording them on a piece of paper, right? What if the patient goes home and just throw the whole thing and never takes anything? They just toss everything, and the next day come to the clinic and say that, oh, I took everything. I took all the pills. Now the clinic will be able to identify this patient is not telling the truth, because first of all, typically the patient is supposed to bring at least 1 or 2 pills back in their next visit. Where the patient goes along to toss everything out, that's non-compliant. And also when a subject is signing the consent form also has the language to ask the subject that, are you willing to comply with everything in this document? Which of course means that you're willing to sign to say that I'll be compliant for the study participation. Standard for reporting. So reporting a lot about adverse events, monitoring reports, final reports, and also reporting to the sponsors. We're reporting to the sponsors, we're reporting to the institutional review boards, and all other regulatory authorities. So those are all people that we typically report study adverse events to.
And for this protocol, accountability is very, very important for abuse substances.
Of course.
It can be used like for anesthesia, that can get someone high. that we have a particular substance we use to put rabbits and mice into anesthesia. Before you can get there, you have a lot of forms that you sign. You have to authenticate the quantity, everything must be put in before you can take that product.
Exactly, because those are all accountability measures.
Yeah. You know that at this time Andrew was here, he took this number of microliters.
Exactly.
He did in this, yeah.
So, who is responsible for GCP? In FDA regulated trials, the biomedical monitoring program is the Office of GCP has primary responsibility to ensure the adherence to the good clinical practice. And the Department of Health and Human Services administer trials. The responsibility of it goes to the Office for Human Research Protection. So different offices have different responsibility for the GCP. We have just a few more slides. I know our time is almost there. Just a few more slides. I just want us to wrap this up for this class. So GCP golden rules. There are 12 golden rules for good clinical practice. One is I know and follow the study protocol. Select, train, and log suitable training study personnel. So ensure that data is recorded, ensure that study equipment is adequate, maximize the trials, participants' protection. You predict accurately and log patient recruitment, meticulously document every product accountability, ensure that timely and efficient safety monitoring and reporting, ensure the quality of lab evaluations, maintain good trial files and archives, maximize data quality, and keep everyone fully informed. And when I talk about keeping everyone fully informed, just making sure that there's a record of every transaction that occurs, just like we're talking about the multiple steps involved in approving and receiving accessing study drugs, right?
Yeah.
GCP compliance. Who is responsible for GCP compliance? Investigators. Those are the people at the site. The sponsors are responsible for complying with GCP throughout the times of the trial. Who ensures that the GCP is compliant or not? So now we talk about the IRB, the institutional review boards are the people that are responsible to make sure that, and those are the responsibility comes now with the fact that there's usually a periodic submissions of the trials to the institutional review board, where the institutional review board will review the trial to determine that, okay, is this trial going well? If it's going well, we'll check mark, okay, let's continue going. So they do this on an annual basis. The mission of the GCP. The GCP Good Clinical Practice Program is the focal point within the FDA regarding issues in human research trials regulated by the FDA. The Good Clinical Practice Program coordinates FDA policies, contributes to leadership direction, and also coordinates FDA's biomedical monitoring program as aspect of the Office of Research Regulatory Affairs. So regulatory affairs is also another office that is interesting. I worked as a regulatory affairs specialist in one of my roles a couple of years ago. It's just about understanding where the regulations are involved and how to apply them in the practice of clinical research. Contributes to international GCP harmonization to the ICH and GCP. Plans to conduct training and outreach programs. The relation of GCPs to SOPs. So SOPs are standard operating procedures. Now, how does the GCP comply or relate with the SOPs of a particular site? SOPs are typically standard operating procedures that a particular investigator or a particular hospital will have as part of their process in conduct of clinical research. A company's standard operating procedures which have full compliance with GCP frequently contain additional company-specific clauses, of course, because SOP is just particularly targeted for the company itself, but GCP is like a generalized guidance that every policy, every institution must adhere to. But there are sometimes that sometimes that some sites are having confusion between what's a GCP and what's not. You know, what's a GCP and what's actually an SOP. But you know, there's usually there's a cut line between what the GCP is applicable to, or what GCP regulations are, and what the SOP constitutes it to be. SOP key points for an SOP for sites that have standard operating procedures. You want to make sure that the company's specific requirements are applicable, the interpretation of GCP by companies, the set rules and instructions or specifications for the requirement, and of course the best practice to make sure that they're assessing the difference between the GCP and the SOP. SOP and modified operating procedures. Modified operating procedures also another part of the SOPs. So the whole point of this slide, this last slide, is just for us to understand that there are different procedures that are involved, because a GCP is a good clinical practice, which of course applies to all sites across, you know, clinical research. The next phase now is talk about the SOP. SOP now goes right down into the site level itself, into the institutions that conduct research. Every organization, you typically will have an SOP. You know, they'll have a standard operating procedure of how they want things to be conducted, how they want research to be carried out, how, you know, just the how and how to, on how to perform those activities. GCP checklist. So it refers to investigator checklist for good clinical practice. Yeah, I think I have this document somewhere. I have to send it to you guys as well. So this is our last slide. The key takeaway that I want us to take away from this session is really to think about the GCP as that body. You know, we talk about the ICH and GCP, International Conference of Harmonization, which really goes down to talk about how research is being conducted, you know, what are some of the regulations to follow, and just be that additional eye to provide the ethical standard to prevent bias by all possible means. Because of course, as human nature, you know, we're bound to want to cheat or whatever, but these guidelines are provided to give guidelines. These rules and regulations are provided to give guidelines to the institution that's conducting the research, the investigator, and their sponsor, who is the manufacturing company and the drug provider. The principal investigator and the sponsor are responsible to comply to GCP regulations. Okay, questions or discussion? Anything that you understand?
Question is, when the GCP and the SOP overlaps, which one do we give preference to?
So before the site or an institution develops an SOP for clinical trials, they must follow the guidelines of the GCP. And the reason for that is because all activities that they're conducting at the level of the site must be compliant with GCP principles. Now, if they are not compliant with GCP principles and they want to be compliant, they can develop SOPs that covers those loopholes that GCP might not cover, because GCP is the big body that, because this GCP may not be applicable, may not know what a site in New York is doing or a site in Minnesota is doing, you know. But now the GCP will be that umbrella that says that this is the general principles that I want every site to follow. But now when it goes down to the specifics, then that's where the site will be able to develop their own SOPs to match, to cover those loopholes that the GCP could not fit in.
Okay.
And an SOP is written by somebody who masters the GCP very well. You cannot be given permission to write an SOP when you don't know GCP.
Of
So
course.
you must master your GCP before you come to the SOP.
We are not talking here about mastering it or not mastering it. We are now, there are some certain things that are peculiar in certain geographical locality. We have geography, environment, culture, and many other factors that can cause the local listen to come now with the SOP to make it applicable, looking at the GCP, but I want it to look like this to my people, but at the cost of making it specific, many things are left out. Now, when you come in to supervise and you discover that these things may be good, but they do not reflect the GCP, what do you do in such a situation?
So the SOP is good, but does not reflect the GCP, right?
Yeah.
So in that situation, we will look for all possible means to make sure that if they have to customize, or the FDA will have to be involved, or the sponsor will have to take amendments, there's something called notifiers, right? They can create notifiers. Notifiers to say that in as much as this is a process in the protocol in the GCP, we are conducting these other steps as part of our cultural compliance with the people within this particular geographical location. That process will be documented and kept as part of the essential documents that will be provided to the manufacturing company. That for this site, they are taking a level of GCP compliance, but these are other levels that does not apply to them for X, Y, and Z reasons. And these are the other measures that they have taken to compensate for those areas that couldn't fit in.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's where the modified operating procedure comes in. You can go back to the other slide. There was something
Yes.
there like modified.
Yes, the MOP.
The MOP and the trial specific operating procedures.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you saw it goes back to the person, because whoever is writing or creating that SOP for that site must have significant knowledge of the GCP to understand that the GCP is not applicable to this component of our site. You know, before they say, okay, no, because it's not applicable to this component of our site, let's develop an SOP to fit into that position. And as soon as they do that, they can't apply that SOP into their practice until they have the approval of the manufacturing company to say that yes, in as much as we want everywhere to follow the GCP guidelines, we acknowledge the SOP that you have created in support as a compensation for these other aspects that couldn't fit into your site.
Okay. So have you witnessed cases where the institutional review board is having problems with your SOPs?
The institutional review boards are usually, so there are two kinds of institutional review boards. We have the institutional review board at the site level, which means the institution itself. Take for example, Mount Sinai, right? Mount Sinai has a local IRB. It has institutional review board made of people within Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Those are involved lawyers, involved physicians, involved patient advocates. Now, they already know all the SOPs within Mount Sinai, right? They have access to all the SOPs in Mount Sinai. So their review of clinical trials cannot have a conflict with their own SOPs that they've developed within Mount Sinai. Now, there's now commercial IRBs. There's commercial institutional review boards. These are ones that are outside of the institution. This manufacturing company may be manufacturing, they manufactured this drug. They decided that they want sites to have the ability to either have trials, either to have their local IRB at the institutional level, or they use the commercial IRB at the commercial level. big sites like Mount Sinai will have the ability to have their own institutional review boards, right? But small sites like Dr. Banning's office, who is participating in this office, in this research, may not have the ability to have the institutional review board at their own site. But now what they're going to do is that Dr. Banning will submit his own research protocols and all his own research documents to the commercial review board. The commercial review board now will be the ones to review all the studies, all the study documentations that for sites that do not have institutional review board at their site, and send the approvals to the sites.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, comments, Pastor?
No, all is well. It's well understood. It's causing me, it's making my appetite to be high, jump to the field next week.
So at the level of the manufacturer, who ensures good manufacturing practice?
So at the level of the manufacturer, they have a lot of guidelines to make sure that they have a lot of inspections, more frequent inspections, to make sure that the manufacturing of that drug is compliant, because they have to follow the good manufacturing practices. They have to be submitting those their reports as well to the FDA for additional review for every manufacturing process, to make sure that they have that protocol that they've written, reviewed, and approved before they actually manufacturing the drugs.
Yeah. Okay. A little bit back to the various phases of clinical trial. Phase 3. Okay. Can the phase 3 be blind and randomized?
Phase 3 studies are typically not blind, but they are sometimes randomized.
Okay.
They are typically not blind because if they are conducting, if the phase 3 is being conducted with comparison to an already existing standard commercial drug available in the pharmacy, right? There's no need for blinding, because we already know that subjects that do not go to the pharmacy to pick up their own drugs, they are receiving the investigational drugs. So there's no need for blinding at that point. Okay. And also the level of bias is being evaluated differently, you know. Yeah. But there's a randomization at phase 3.
Okay. Now that you, the researcher, you don't see the patients, how do you authenticate the authenticity of your participants?
What do you mean by we don't see the patient?
Like you go to the doctor's office, the investigator is treating the patients, but the doctor submit you forms like, okay, patient A is this patient B is this. So what are how do you authenticate? How do you say that this is authentic?
So now that's where.
So because there's falsification, how do you make sure that your things are not falsified? Exactly. Because people are funny out there. I don't trust anybody.
Trust me, we have seen, and they have. If you go to FDA, if you look at, if you go onto FDA website and search for malpractice and audit form 483, you see a lot of investigators have been terminated. Their medical license have been terminated due to malpractice. But now the good question I asked is, how does the sponsor authenticate that documents submitted by the investigator side are accurate and legitimate, right? That's what brings us, you and I, now into the picture as a clinical research associate, right? The clinical research associate now will go to the site on a periodic basis, either monthly or every 2 months, go to the site, review the data to make sure that this is accurate, not just accurate, because now the sponsor has created an online platform where they said that all the patients will be recorded, patient data will be recorded in this system, right? Now the clinical research coordinator at the site level will collect the weight, go into the computer and put in the weight, copy from their own electronic health medical record system, put into the sponsor's own system so that the sponsor can see from their own end, right? because the sponsor does not have access to the electronic health medical record system that the site had, the doctor had utilized within their site. Now, when a CRA, a clinical research associate, goes to the site, what do? A clinical research associate goes to the site, go on there, they see, they can review the paper form that has been filled out, and they also review the electronic health medical record system to make sure that this patient data that was entered in this system is the same that the information that was collected from this system.
Okay.
You know. Yeah.
Right.
So that goes a long way to prevent a lot of bias and cheating and falsification and stuff like that. And even at that, there's still of those forms of falsification that still happens.
Yeah, it's a lot with these Asian people and Chinese people. They're good at that. It makes like in a research lab where I work, there are a lot of things going on that cannot be reproduced. So somebody will do something, take it to an international conference, but when you try to reproduce it in your lab, it cannot be, no matter what you do, because part of it has been falsified.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So the PowerPoints, what are the PowerPoints that you want us to go through?
So
No, we should go through all.
now, if you have the energy and the time, you can.